Documentaries, they're everywhere nowadays. Their topics can literally be on anything from politics to food to, I think in the title slide there's one called Kitty, which is literally just about cats roaming the street of Russia, which kind of is a testament to just, how many creative topics you can come up with. People think this is why documentary has lasted as long as it has. However, there's more of a pattern suggesting that when technology has improved, more people are willing to make films. So next slide, please. So what is a documentary? A documentary is a film that aims to inform audiences about truth or facts about our world. It's mainly non-fiction. However, sometimes it does kind of blur the line between fiction and non-fiction. That's where bias and controversy kind of comes into. Next slide, please. So the first films that were ever made were technically the first documentaries. However, they were called actualities at the time. And then in the 1920s, people started to really get into, films on foreign cultures, foreign lands, the jungle, that kind of thing. And that's mainly because, well, we didn't have the internet. Books were probably hard to find on the cultures, and air travel wasn't actually that affordable until the 1950s. So film companies took advantage of that. They sent a filmmaker called Robert Flaherty to a Polynesian island to try and replicate his past successes. And that film is Moana. I don't know if the Disney film is based on it, but who knows? It's basically about the daily activities of a tribe. However, I actually looked more into it, and it turns out quite a lot of the scenes in it are staged. So again, that kind of goes back to the line of fiction, non-fiction. But anyway, the film was a financial failure, but a film critic called John Grierson watched it, and hence the term documentary was born. Next slide, please. Yeah, so by the end of the 1920s, the 1950s, governments and private organizations basically realized they could use documentary and films as like a political message. And with sound recording equipment becoming more advanced and advanced, it was even easier to basically, match up footage and commentary and make a message out of it. Then in the 1950s, cameras became lighter. They were cheaper, which meant more people was going to buy them and make films. If any of you did move an image, I'm sure you've heard of French New Wave. Another movement like that spawned out of France. It was called cinema verite. I believe most modern documentaries kind of used a lot of the techniques from this, where the filmmaker's actively involved in the film. He or she will interview people, they might narrate over it. And it was described as kind of using crude reality with the camera. And what I think that means is maybe bringing the camera to try and capture things that you're not supposed to see. In the film Roger and Me, this happens quite a lot. Michael Moore will take the camera into places like GM headquarters and basically record them getting kicked out and trying to demand an interview. Next slide, please. So in the 1980s, distribution became a lot easier. And then by the 2000s, I think this is where documentaries really started to shine. They could now be box office hits, which made not only production companies take them more seriously, but the general public took them more seriously too. You got really weird, wacky ideas like Super Size Me. It's basically just about a guy, challenging a statement from McDonald's saying their food is healthy, which is, it's clearly not. The Fahrenheit 9/11, which is literally about Michael Moore, low-key investigating the president of the United States. And then to the end of the 2007, 2009, reality TV was invented. The reason for this was because TV stations, they needed shows to fill their daytime slots. And the easiest way to do that was to make non-fiction shows. However, these shows aren't really that non-fiction because some of it is deliberately dramatized for entertainment purposes. Next slide, please. So now we're on to the film we're sort of focusing on today. Roger and Me. The basic plot of the film is Michael Moore trying to get a statement from the chairman of GM Motors, Roger Smith. He recently made the decision to close down a lot of factories in the city of Flint, the birthplace of the company, General Motors. I mean, if you go to the next slide there was a clip. I don't know if it will work here. Yeah.
Works, yeah.
Yeah, it should work. Cool, right. There's no sound in this, so I'm just going to talk over it, but this is one of the final scenes in the film. So, you know, if you haven't seen it, spoilers. But basically what the scene is Roger Smith is giving a talk to his employees, like a Christmas speech about, you know, family and happiness and all that jazz. But he just comes across as an absolute hypocrite, because more kind of crosscuts between this and then a family getting kicked out of their home the day prior on Christmas Eve. Right, there it is. He does this throughout the film. He consistently contrasts rich and poor people to kind of prove his point, I guess. He doesn't outright state a bias towards General Motors and Roger Smith, but it's clear he does kind of have one. His father worked for GM, his friends worked for GM, and they got laid off because of this. And, you know, Flint is his hometown. And as you kind of see throughout the film, Flint sort of turns into well, maybe not a dump, like, but it just gets gradually worse economically. Again, he uses a lot of the cinema verite techniques, participating in the actual film, narrating. He gives a rather sarcastic narration over the film, which kind of makes scenes like this a lot more hard-hitting and more grim to watch. And what I think is kind of interesting is there's no actual evidence that GM is the reason this family got kicked out. You know, for all we know, these could have been unemployed for years, but Moore's built such an interesting argument up to this point that you as the audience kind of just assume that GM is responsible for it. I'd say he succeeded, because Roger Smith had to resign a year later, and this film basically launched Moore's career. So yeah. Next slide, please, and I'll pass it over to Gabrielle. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the narrative and non-narrative structure. So narrative and non-narrative are two concepts often debated. Although films can both be described as non-narrative, non-fiction has been associated with documentary films. Non-fiction films are assumed factual descriptions of actual events, persons, other than their fictional or invented recreation. So they eschew or de-emphasize stories and narratives, enjoying other forms like lists, repetition, or contrasts as their narrative structure. So non-narrative clearly suggests distinctive ways of seeing through they often overlap in documentary films. One form does not necessarily imply the other. A non-narrative film, or particularly fictional, conversely, a non-fiction film can be seen as a narrative. Next slide, please. Okay, so interrogation and analysis in documentary film are often intended to persuade a viewer about facts or truths. So persuasive positions articulate a perspective that expresses a personal view, or using emotions or beliefs, and aim to persuade viewers to feel and see in a certain way, or to do so through voices and interviews to convince viewers. So the films create movie experiences markedly different from those narrative cinema. So these experiences are non-narrative portraits that envision individuals in ways quite differently with the histories of the same people. So others are about the truth of events. Okay, so they encourage us to enjoy, imagine, and think about our temporal historical views with the world. So these movies remind us, however, that they have many other kinds of relationships with us in many other insightful ways, such as debate, exploration, and analysis. Next slide, please. Okay, so the actors and narration tell us about a certain angle and different points of view. So the films might assume so it's basically like the voice of God, basically telling us about the narrative and things about, you know, documentary as facts. So documentary films generally shape their attitudes and positions according to four principal frameworks. So the first is associated with the effort to explore the world and its peoples. The second aims to interrogate or analyse an event or problem. The third assumes the stance of a debate or polemicist who attempts to persuade the audience of a certain truth or point of view. The fourth foregrounds and reflects the presence and activity of the filmmaking process and or the filmmaker. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to talk about the codes and conventions, but first I want to define what a code is. So a code is a term used in linguistics, and semiotics mean a system of signs from which a message is generated. In Communication Act, a code must be shared by the sender and the receiver for the message to be understood. For example, traffic signals use a color code, but film analysts isolate the codes of camera movement, framing, lighting, acting, and more that determine the specific form of a particular shot, scene, film, or genre. So you're going to see different types of camera work, which is used, such as handheld in actuality footage, and a tripod, which would be used to stabilize the shot. So you're going to see archive materials, such as there's examples of it. So TV adverts, programs, films, and news clips. There's also magazines, newspapers, and articles, still images used with pans, zooms, and tilts. So in interviews, the subject is usually positioned to the left or right of the center, and there's different types of shots used, such as the medium shot and close-up shots and more. So I feel like Roger and Me uses the rule of thirds in a good way. It's followed throughout. So the interviewee is sat in a stationary chair and facing the interviewee. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the editing. So whenever the questions are being asked by the interviewer, they will be edited out. So well, right. So there's going to be cutaways. They're going to be used to avoid jump cuts and montage editing. And editing is going to be subtle. And obviously, the cut is the most common edit used throughout. So typically, whenever interviews are being shown in documentaries, you're going to see the name of the interviewer on the bottom left of the screen. So there could be green screens used as well. For example, Keeping Up the Kardashians, you're going to see in the background like this weird, background backdrop, but that's not relevant to this. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is a clip used in Roger and Me at the start. So you can see this is archive material. So this is Michael Moore when he was younger. So in the background, you're going to hear classical music. He described himself as a strange kid. And let's see. So he described himself that he crawled backwards when he was 2. His parents thought he had something wrong with him. By the time he was 6, he already had memorized President Kennedy's inaugural address, which is impressive, I think. But so the rule of thirds, like I said, is already done well. Let me see. All right. So his mom didn't show up to his first birthday party because she was having a sister. So his dad tried cheering him up, letting him eat the whole cake. And he knew at that point there was no more to it than this. Right. Okay. So right, his dad worked on the assembly line at GMC's for 33 years, and his entire family worked there. Everyone but him. And the factory wasn't for him. His heroes were plant people who escaped the factory. That's it. Next slide, please. I'll pass it over to Rachel. Why? Yeah, thanks.
Cumulative organizations is a series of images or sounds that is presented throughout the course of a film. An example of this would be in Joris Ivan's Rain in 1929. It presents images of a rainstorm in Amsterdam, and it shows the rain falling in many different ways and angles. Contrastive organizations present a series of contrasts or oppositions, which is meant to indicate different points of view on a subject. This could be contrasting images of war and peace. Developmental organizations are present places, objects, individuals, and experiences through a specific pattern of development that is non-narrative. However, it still follows a logic of progression. Next slide, please. Documentary film has the power to educate. It can spark conversations between controversial and important topics from around the world. Documentaries provide the chance to venture out into the world from your own home. It gives us a chance to see different cultures from around the world and show points of views on different subjects. Revealing new or ignored realities. Documentary films offer a different kind of truth than narrative movies. This often means to show revealing new or ignored realities by showing people, events, or levels of reality we have never seen before, as they have been excluded from our social experience or from our experiences to narrative films. By showing us an object or place from angles beyond the realistic range of human vision, it brings a new perspective and brings us closer to a new discovered reality. An example of this is in David and Albert Maisley's Grey Gardens from 1975. It portrays the quirky extremes of a mother and daughter. Slowly, while following their daily routines and dwelling on the incidentals in their life, the film develops our capacity truly to see the two individuals whose unique personalities and habits become less and less strange. Confronting assumptions, altering opinions. Documentary films often present a familiar or well-known topic and make us interpret the subject in a different way. Documentaries about a political figure or a controversial event may confront viewers' assumptions or attempt to alter received opinions about the person or event. Others may ask us to rethink an event in history. Documentaries often attempt to persuade viewers of certain facts, attack other points of views, argue with other films, or motivate viewers to act on social problems or concerns. An example of this would be a Michael Murr's Sicko from 2007, which argues with the healthcare system that the healthcare system in the United States is antiquated and destructive and that it needs to be changed. Next slide, please. Michael Murr uses a hybrid filmmaking strategy. This means that he uses expository and interactive modes to manipulate the text to form a subject ideology. The particular film is told in a narrative style, although it is a documentary. Michael eloquently tells a story while depicting corporate greed in America in the 1980s. He uses real footage of events and real people with the use of natural sound and lighting. This affects how we see the film, as we view it as realistic due to the way it is shown to the audience. In this particular scene, we can see the setting we are placed in, which is an upper-class elegant party that only the rich would be able to attend. Michael uses this event to interview people about the main issues surrounding this film. They see the issues as not worth talking about, as it means nothing to them. They think the situation isn't that bad because they don't understand the threat that it causes the less fortunate. The voiceover acts as an explanation, establishing the scene we are watching and telling us the information. This makes the audience more involved in the situation in front of us and gives us a much deeper insight. They use diegetic sound in this scene when interviews are being held. However, non-diegetic sound, such as the score, is placed over the images and has been lowered to hear the interviews. This draws our attention to the words that are being spoken. Thank you.